is Leslie Powers of Alive and Thriving. I have a special interview today, a podcast with my friend Jungle. We both have been trained as social workers and have some thoughts about the field and some of the dilemmas that social workers and mental health professionals face in this world. Both of us have an awareness of natural law and also of the I guess the corruption and deception of the government system, which social work is very intricately tied into. And so we're going to break that down a bit and talk about ways that we might break out of the restrictions of the government system that clearly is not really helping the needs of the people that it is saying it is helping. So we're going to talk a little more about that. So social workers, mental health professionals, this is for you. Please listen with an open mind, reflect. My name's Leslie. I've been in the field of social work for over 30 years. I have my master's in social work. I got that in 1990. I live in California now and am licensed here. I've been focusing on individual therapy and working a lot with trauma over the last decade or more. And but I've been in a lot of settings and in different states. So I'll share some of my experiences on that. Jungle, how about you? Tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, that's an extensive background, Leslie. Kudos to you. I am I've been in the field for 6 years. I'm not currently working in the field, but I did learn quite a bit in that short period of time. I started off, well, I went to school in New Jersey and got my master's degree in social work, and I never did go on to get my license, but I did, like I said, work in the field for 6 years of mental health as a counselor. Um, so I started off doing technician jobs, did about a year of that, and then, in two different states, Maryland and New Jersey. And then I went on to case management, did that for a year with developmentally disabled adults. And then I moved on after that to a behaviorist position, a behavior specialist position, and did that for about a year. And then I did about a year of internship with substance abuse clients and in two different sites in New Jersey, uh, mostly adults, and eventually worked for about, half a year, 6 months or so in that field. Like I was doing the internship and then I did the actual job. So yeah, I mean, and I worked with some juvenile detention kids for 6 months, psychiatric, individuals and neuropsych population for a little bit as well. That was probably the hardest, I
Yeah.
would say. Like I would say between the neuropsych and the behaviorist population is the hardest, uh, in my opinion.
Yeah, and neediest, very, very
Yeah.
challenging population. Yeah, I'll share a few more details about the settings and populations I've worked in. So when I graduated, well, I went into a school-based position. I had an internship as a student assistance counselor in high school. Then I was hired as a student assistance counselor I did my graduate school in New York State, grew up in New York and did my graduate school there, worked at school-based. I then did home-based work in the inner city of Hartford, Connecticut. Worked with mothers of young children, pregnant mothers and mothers of young children, went into the homes, did home-based family interventions. I left Connecticut and moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I worked in a group home setting with teenagers and then aftercare, and then did inpatient, like residential treatment it was a very cool program doing recreation, like basically wilderness therapy. So I was,
Oh,
hiking and rock climbing and
yeah.
doing a variety of things like that, along with, running groups and so forth. And then I did outpatient mental health work where I was doing a combination of in office and then home based therapy. Very
Mhm.
interesting. Um, going out into the field. Then I
Yeah.
went to Colorado, and let's see. There, I changed up my path for about 3 years. I was working in sports organization for a
Okay.
while, and then left Colorado, came to California. I worked in therapeutic preschool for a little bit before then moving into Alzheimer's. So I went from the littlest to the,
Oh, wow.
aging
Yeah.
population with
Yeah.
Alzheimer's. I was the director of social services there for a couple years.
Wow.
Moved up a little bit further north, went back into the group home, adolescent group home world. Also got my feet into foster care. Was the
Wow.
director of the foster care center there, as well as a social worker in foster care. Gosh, there's quite a bit. And then from there, I think I went into adoptions, worked with adoptions, did home studies and post-adoption support,
Mhm.
and then went into outpatient psychotherapy in a health center that was really aiming to be an integrative health center. So where they had medical, dental, and behavioral health. And so we were really trying to provide holistic care, and with the mission of having care, right?
Y
It
Yeah.
this organization was built from the grassroots up to help the rural community, and had really kind of open-minded founders. So they brought in, energy healing. They brought in homeopathy,
Great.
chiropractic, and, there was a holistic mindset. And from that agency, I worked there for 9 years, did outpatient mental health therapy, but also got to do some crisis work on the mobile crisis team. I did some behavioral health consultants with on the medical wing. So there's kind of a lot of different types of experience, but my focus has really been therapy, mental health therapy, helping people overcome complex trauma. And that's sort of, it's become a passion, and it's really expanded to my understanding of really the whole world, and how traumatized, we all are to some degree, some much more than others, because it's a continuum. But yet we under emphasize the amount of stress that we're all under in a chronic way, and how that impacts us. And I think when we're talking about, as we get into the field of social work and the mental health field, I think it's important to recognize that the people who are on the front lines are really dealing with an incredible amount of stress in the world, right? Seeing the front row seats of the dysfunction and the pain and the suffering of people and the world. So it's a very challenging job. And I think part of the reason that I'm motivated to talk about this is that I think that the systems don't take good care of their employees. I don't think that they really apply good mental health care to the
Mm.
social workers and therapists in the field. In fact, social workers are given super high caseloads. They're thrown in often with minimal training. It's like sink or swim. You're flying by the seat of your pants. There's all sorts of expectations, paperwork, etc. And so we want to talk about that. We want to talk, how did it get like this? How did it get so challenging? And where are the resources? And how, because the system as it is right now is failing. The system has become so integrated with the government and programs and policies and so forth. So
But if you don't protect the frontline workers, then you're really going to go up in flames. The whole system will just, collapse on itself, as you just said it's doing, and who suffers the most is the clients themselves.
yeah. And then the workers, the social workers really become clients themselves a lot.
Yeah.
How many professionals are struggling with depression, anxiety,
Mhm.
burnout, overload,
Mhm.
exhaustion on psychotropic meds, right?
Well,
Yeah,
they often say, yeah, let's make sure you take your self-help time or self-care time, but you don't have time for self-care because, they're overloading you with all this work. And it is a serious issue because a lot of as therapists and counselors, we're absorbing, especially a lot of us are empathic and we're able to absorb the energies of others and we're internalizing that. And if we don't have time to properly process our emotions out of it, then it just obviously sits inside of our bodies and rots and decays inside of us. So we
yeah,
definitely have to prioritize those matters to make a change and for our overall well-being, so that we can intact, we can keep the we can actually restructure the overall mental health field
yeah.
in a proper way.
Yeah, yeah, I think too, like the schools aren't teaching really, and neither are agencies. They're not teaching people how to process the burden of all of this emotional energy. And in fact, it's not really much of a consideration in any place I've ever worked, really, maybe a little bit in one, but it's like you have quotas to meet, right?
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
professionals are working under um,
Oh yeah.
a quota of some sort that they have to meet, and that takes the precedent, the numbers. It almost feels, even with therapy, can feel like an assembly line,
Hmm.
just like one after the other, after the other, after another, and you have to have so
Yeah,
many, hours in order to, justify your job. Um,
absolutely. And
and
how
I
can the
don't think the schools prepare us so much in a lot of
no,
ways for this field.
no, and that's true because it's all, in the books memorization, and then you're not getting the real life experience until you actually go out there. That's true for a lot of fields, but this particularly is unique in this way because we're very hands-on, with it's not just crunching numbers or anything like that, but it's actual like you're dealing with human people and real life situations, crisis, and yeah, it lowers the quality of care when you're not able to attend. You might sacrifice your notes and documentation time in order to have, let's say you do that and you have better, more quality time with your client, but then you end up inevitably getting, you know, sucked out or kicked out of the corporation or the company because you're getting in trouble for not keeping up with your notes, and using the whole, technical terms that you're supposed to be using can get you in trouble, and everything's time sensitive and everything's a priority, mainly because of why? Billing is the most important thing. So if money is the most important thing, then that obviously means that the client isn't, and um for that matter, not even the the worker is definitely not cared for. So
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I would say that probably almost everyone in the field, their biggest complaint is around the documentation and the amount of it and how much it takes the time away from the actual direct service,
mhm.
especially in government organizations, county organizations. There's sometimes ridiculous amounts of documentation, and
Yeah.
it definitely takes away the time from clients. And when that's not an option, that means that the, the professionals are working ridiculously long hours overtime and not
Yeah.
getting a proper balance in their own energy, to sustain all of that.
Well, that's the funny thing. When I was doing it, and you probably have had the same very similar experience as my experience is probably as a microcosm of yours. um, I would, in order to balance out a lot of bosses will expect you to do 50% in the field, 50% in the office, like in terms of the time that you spend on the clock, right? So a lot of workers, including myself, would, spend hours out in the field so that we could get that quality care and then, actually spend quality time with the client, and um whether that means taking them for a nature walk or doing some yoga with them, or helping them with finding um, vouchers or whatever, uh, getting resources. And then in the midst of that, they're obviously going through multiple different personal life problems that they're sharing with you. So you have to document all that stuff. So what happened with me is that when I would bring that home after, let's say I finished my shift at 7 p.m. I'm supposed to do that. I would be documenting for about maybe an hour or two, or maybe who knows. I spend the time in the office, and then I just couldn't handle staying in the office anymore. Maybe I was falling asleep, or like lowering your energy level is already spent. So then you decide, okay, let me just take this work home with me, and I'll finish it there. I gotta eat, eventually gotta eat dinner, and then by the time you get back to the notes, you're up till midnight sometimes, a
Mhm.
lot of times, I would say. So it's like then you start the whole thing over again. You don't really have any time for yourself.
Yeah, it could be like that. And I think that the demands vary from job to job and setting to setting. And inner city probably has well, a lot of intensity, as does a lot of the remote rural areas too, because of the lack of resources and intensive needs. But yeah, oftentimes, individuals are out there facing these horrific situations where the resources are very limited as well. And so
Hmm.
you're like one person trying to plug holes and,
Hmm.
where there's like a flood coming out and, yeah, it can be. And there's also, I'll just add, when you're out in the field in this work, it's potentially dangerous. I've been in homes with like
Oh
bullet
yeah.
holes through the
Oh
walls from gang activity and
yeah.
um, questionable kind of drug dealers on the front porch when I'm going in and my car
Mm.
breaks down and, lots of stories there.
Oh
But
man.
yeah, it's an underpaid, I think, underappreciated, undervalued, underpaid profession. There's sort of this mindset, where you're not you almost have to prove I'm not here for the money. I'm here because I care.
Yeah.
And people will say, "Well, you get paid for this. You're just here for the money." The
Mhm.
truth is most people who go into the profession aren't doing it for the money because if money is your priority, you're not going to go into social work or mental health.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Hear that often. That's so
yeah.
true.
Yeah, especially in the public sector. I mean, you might go into private practice, and even there, you have to really bust your ass with a lot of clients to make decent money. And for me, that's burnout.
Mhm.
It's not sustainable and healthy from my point of view.
Yeah, and you were talking about also like not in, not even including the micromanagement that goes on from the top down, that puts an extra layer of pressure on the worker. Um, so you're really, yeah, getting burnt out and not and underpaid at the same exact time, and underappreciated, undervalued, and then that internalizes into your own self-confidence and all that that can translate to that being affected. Because you're just used to being taking and taking and taking and not actually receiving. Oh, sorry, you're used to giving, giving, giving and not actually receiving. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's a lot of output without a lot of personal input. In fact, the work you really need to separate yourself and your own needs from the
mhm,
work. You're not there to meet your own needs, you're there to help others very
mhm.
intensively sometimes. Yeah, the burnout in the system and the imbalance there. Why do people go into this field? Right. I think that's a consideration here because
Yeah.
it can be a setup for that overwork and for the poor boundaries, the codependency.
Oh
And
yeah.
what are your thoughts on like who are the people generally that go into the field?
Definitely a lot of people that have the rescuer type of tendency or complex, you might say. Um, and people who, a lot of, you know, there are a lot of genuine hearted people if we're talking strictly social work. But if we're talking about anybody that gets into mental health, it's also, there are a lot of people with their own mental health issues that go in because they feel like I've been through this, so I can definitely help people. Or they might seem also in a inverted way go into the field to seek out validation somehow, through, treat, oh, this person has it worse than me, so that makes me feel better. um but definitely there's a lot of people that are genuine in the field, that want to help, that think that they're going to get into it for you know grassroots reasons, and little do they know it's actually not all grassroots. It's oftentimes like there are a lot of grassroots organizations, but there's also, that top down control from the government, and um and that oftentimes is the more powerful force, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And yeah, so people do want to, I think also a lot of people have a need or a desire to fix people. So they see like a bunch of broken people that they want to go and fix. And there's obviously an altruistic character trait that is inside of them, you know, but it's also, it's a varying, it goes by varying degrees. Like it's a spectrum of people, that some are more altruistic and some are less, and they just have more selfish motives in there. So, but yeah, I would hope.
I agree with you. I would say in my experience, most people have gone in for altruistic reasons out of care
Yeah.
and concern, but also maybe other motivations that are secondary that
Hmm.
aren't always conscious. Like you're saying, those rescuer
Hmm.
tendencies or the caregiver kind of personality, the fixers, and that this could be, sometimes lead towards enabling or overdoing, doing
Yeah.
for others,
Yeah.
giving up too much of yourself
Hmm.
to help others, the martyrs,
Yeah.
a lot
Fighting
of,
for the
uh,
underdog, fighting for the underdog, and
yeah.
also, yeah, for the victim.
Yeah, very much. People who care about the underdog, that see that there's, people suffering that aren't able to speak up for themselves and in proper ways. I definitely am one of, those. I care about the underdog. I care about fairness, like, right, people that have justice
Yes,
templates, really get into the social work. I think that, most all of us have some issues of our own,
absolutely.
hard not to.
Yeah.
That is a part of why we go into the field, and in some ways seeking our own healing
Yeah.
through this experience, or our own like understanding of the world
Yeah.
through the experience. And I think that if you don't go into the field really, knowing yourself or with boundaries, then you're inevitably going to run into some hardships or glitches along the way. We grow and learn as we go. When you're young, if you go right into the field out of, like high school, then graduate school, and you go right into the field, there's a lot you don't know about yourself. So you're discovering it as you go.
Oh, yeah.
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 And then supervision can be weak. Like,
Mhm.
for therapists, there's a more structured process of training, and most graduate schools, you have internships. So you do get to have some field time to get your
Definitely.
feet wet and experience. And then you go out to your first job,
Mhm.
postgraduate school, and you're still pretty novice, because my experiences, I really learned in the field much more so than in college. The
Yeah,
graduate program was much more conceptual, you know,
absolutely.
but it wasn't it didn't integrate the concept so much with the experience. And it's
Mhm.
through the experience that you really become like a journeyman social worker or a
Uh,
therapist. And I
yeah,
want to emphasize that because I think there are also a lot of really good providers, helpers that aren't necessarily like master's level, but that have really good experience. I would say though that the master's level and the way that we're trained, we're through you don't have to get licensed,
yeah,
but if you choose to go down the licensing path, then different doors open up. and certain training requirements and so forth. But I don't think it's necessary. What's really important is that there be the guiding ethics,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, along the way, that when people enter the field, that they actually care
Mhm.
about doing what's right and
Yeah.
understand what right is.
You could say
And
that. Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of people in the helping field that should not be in there
Mhm.
because their primary motivation is not to help. Um,
Or
but
they're confused about what helping is and then
or
end up overstepping bounds or going sideways on that. And then people who do stupid things that violate, you know, clients
yeah,
in some way or other, then all of a sudden that becomes a restriction for the field, right?
yeah.
And that micromanaging comes
Oh
in
yeah.
that
Yeah.
says, you know, what classes you have to take and how you're supposed to document and how much, you know, you have to pay XYZ, you know, to
Exactly.
maintain your status.
Which a lot of those trainings are common sense things that you should know already before getting into the field. So it is important for the individual to check their own values before they get in to the field and, make sure, yeah, make sure that they are in it for the right motivations,
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. And so I think to be a good clinician or social worker, the self-knowledge is of utmost important, and that
Mm.
you're doing your own psychological work and in parallel time. Because if you're not, then you're going to act somewhat unconsciously and be driven by needs that may not be what is
Oh,
optimal or ethical, you
oh
know.
yeah. Yeah. And then exactly. You got to know where your boundaries are, where they lie with the client, and they're, as much as you might see them as somewhat, relatable, and not to say that you have to dehumanize them whatsoever, but also recognizing them as equal and in an intrinsic human is the point of the whole field, right? But at the same time, not crossing the boundaries, like, they can't be your friend per se. They could be, well, we use words like that. It's such a gray area, right? Because there are varying cases where, um we encourage calling them, you know hey friend, what I mean, but that's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of taking your work home with you and calling them on the side, or trying to meet up and have a romantic relationship with them, is obviously out of the question. You can't
Yeah.
be doing that. It's just a conflict of interest, no matter how, um I don't know, how normal you might think it feels or whatever. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, a lot of common sense stuff that one should have already knowing before they get into the field.
Yeah, you know, and it is that people don't always think about. We're not trained in it in our normal life, right? Or in school. These things like the power differentials when you're a
Yeah,
helping person, there's
absolutely.
there's the transference that happens where,
Yeah.
you know, a client may project onto you, you know, the qualities of a mother or a
Mm.
father, or you know, some kind of warped or distorted expectation. And the more, and we have to be very conscious of that person's vulnerability, so that we're not feeding into a fallacy,
Yeah. Agreed.
creating unrealistic expectations. So there is like a real importance of understanding the boundaries and in what you do, what you say, you know, and really value. It's like there's a vulnerability in the population,
Mhm.
and so to me, it's something that we need to hold sacred and
Yeah.
be very aware of, because we are in a place of power
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
can be deeply abused. It can be violated, and that's where the wrongdoings happen in the
Mhm.
field, is the violation of the power position.
And
Uh,
yeah, to go along with what you're saying, I think that that is one thing that the institution or the schools do teach well. From my experience, my school did teach well with teaching that, you know, there is a power with social workers and social work field, and the vulnerability of the client, and how you said that it needs to be kept sacred. I think they do a good job with that when it comes to the framework of teaching in the schools. So I um I know that we're not just like dogging the whole framework, because there's definitely a lot of good stuff there. But yeah, I think we're also here to recognize like how to bridge the gap and, fill in the holes, because there
Yeah,
are a lot of holes in the framework.
sure. And we're dealing with people who are not infrequently suicidal or hopeless or um, on the verge of, very impulsive actions, dangerous to self or others, substance abuse, and so forth. So there's a real need for real that care is around is connected to our empathy,
Yeah.
awareness, and to also hold on to our perspective and our sense of self when
Hmm.
with people who are highly dysregulated, right? I
Oh
wanted
yeah.
to share in terms of the positive some
Hmm.
of the social work ethics, which I think are good.
Yeah.
Um, they include values and responsibilities, including social justice, advocating for those who may not have a voice in society and to confront, wrongdoings in inequities, um, to value the dignity and worth of every person, to seek to work with competence, right? To maintain our continuing education, our training, to keep our skills up to date, etc. um, the importance of human relationships. So social work tends to be a little bit different in its emphasis on the systems, the relationship systems that are important to people, and the stages of life, working with integrity, being committed to ethical behavior and holding up
Oh yeah.
principles, being principle based, being trustworthy and responsible, and provide service to help people in need and to maintain confidentiality and privacy, to
Mhm.
be aware of the sensitivity too of the matters that people are sharing with us, right? So it is like,
Yeah.
people are sharing their deepest griefs at times. So there is a big responsibility in how we handle that. And
Yep.
I find it, so this to me this is sacred work.
Hmm.
And I get frustrated in that I feel that the way that the government institutions and the way that the nonprofit agencies with the best of intentions end up being understaffed, overworked,
Oh
stressed
yeah.
out, overextended, and then the insurance companies will come in with all of these micromanaging of, documentation, the words you use, the telling you what is appropriate or not as an intervention that's not really based in clinical judgment even. It's sort of cookie cutter stuff. It adds a lot of stress that
Mhm.
actually gets in the way of the work, and to me violates the sacred nature of the relationship, and the work itself, because it's a different mindset when you're with a client, and then you have to like jump out of that and then go into another headspace to think about certain like um words and things to meet the criteria
Yeah.
of the insurance company or the documentation requirements, and it's often there's this like disconnect there,
Mhm.
that isn't necessarily helpful. They'll say, oh, this is all research based, this is what professionalism is, but it's
Mhm.
really kind of made up in a way,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
very distant, kind of disconnected way,
Yeah.
and it makes you feel a little bit like you're out of you are disconnected, right?
Oh,
You know, when you're in doing your documentation in a lot of ways, and it's very unnecessary, and it puts a lot of stress on providers, because we're like, am I gonna like write the wrong word, and then the insurance company's not gonna pay, or
mhm,
I'm not gonna get paid, or I'm gonna get written up. At
mhm.
one agency, the county auditor, because the auditors come in, right, and they go through your charts, and then they look for excuses to not pay you.
Oh, yeah, that's their primary motivation.
Yeah, it's crazy. All the money that's being spent on people to come in, like, get in the way of the work that you're
Yeah,
actually doing. That's good work. And
yeah,
they one auditor denied a whole chart because the therapist used the word support, that they were provided support to a client, and they're like, well, you don't need a master's degree to support someone, so this isn't a professional service, like, nix.
that's
Right.
insane.
Yeah, like crazy shit like that. So there's this compartmentalization that tends to happen, and this hierarchical nature, which is what happens generally in government systems. And
Uh,
there's this, middle management that's the interface with the funding sources, or the sort of
yeah,
higher ups,
so,
and then
like, the administration.
yeah, the administration, right? Lot of money in the admin,
It's
lot of
almost
money in
like
auditing.
it's like a divide in a lot of companies between the rest of the workers and the administrative workers because they just think that they're better and they deal with, all the policies, regulations, and money. And yeah, like you said, like the funding just dictates how the quality of care that the workers are able to give, and it's affecting the sacred nature of the work itself. Um, yeah,
Most frontline workers, they don't want to deal with the government policy and tons of meetings. Like, how many hours of meetings, do most agencies put their people through? And they're boring, and they're not very productive, and they're
but,
usually like
um,
giving you rules, or they're giving you silly reminders, and it's not in the best interest of the people we serve, nor in the best interest of the providers, who really need to be nurtured and sort of given an opportunity to reboot, and have
yeah,
energy and good morale while you're out there doing the work. So most people in the field that I hear talking say that the greatest stress is the system itself, the agencies, not the work with the clients.
yeah, and
Most people love the interaction with clients, get a lot out of it, but it's that extraneous stuff. And
mm-hmm.
I feel like that the field has gone astray,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of those people in insurance don't even have a mental health background, or they're not even focused on the overall well-being of the client. It's just, are you using the right words, and are you going to fit the right code so that we have to give you money for that, and or like, or we can take, or so that we could take away money from you actually. That's, like you said, that's their MO.
It's
Uh,
like the minimal service is what they want to give.
and
And
which has
so
nothing to do with mental health. It has nothing
yeah,
to do with human centeredness, so.
it's not, the system's not wellness based. It's
Mm-mm,
not actualization focused.
mm-mm.
If you don't have the symptoms, then they can deny you service. They can deny you help. So it's very symptom based. It's very impairment focused, functional impairment symptoms. And that makes
Oh,
it tricky, when really, what are we trying to do? We're trying to enhance the lives of people to really be the best they can be, clearly
I,
get out of the symptoms that are impairing their life, but it's
and
really more than that.
hmm and it's also to prevent them from getting worse. So it's like oftentimes the system, the way it is like they won't help you unless you're hanging by a thread. But we're trying to prevent people from even getting to that point oftentimes, and it's like by the time that you get the help, it's too late. It's like all these other problems have compounded on top of that one problem. So
Yeah, middle class people really have the hardest time accessing services too. There's a class division in access to help. If you don't have insurance, or you don't have enough money, then a lot of people can't even afford mental health
Mm-hmm.
help. And most of the nonprofit agencies are there addressing the lower income Medi-Cal, Medicare population. That's all government
Mm-hmm.
controlled, and that's where really some of the worst work conditions are and the most impact on the providers. And then you have like things like child protective services or
Oh yeah.
child and family services, where their caseloads are incredibly high, where they're not trained properly, they're
Mhm.
not given really the right knowledge about child development, even, or the understanding of attachment, and are very burned out, often
Yeah.
have their own mental health problems, very compartmentalized. So again, hierarchy, which separates the front line from what's going on above. Most social workers and therapists they don't even want to deal with that. So you just kind of go like this, and you just are in your lane and you do it. So
Yep.
you're not really seeing the corruption and the bullshit that's going on, and you don't want to know about it. You just want to do your work.
Yeah.
And so that creates this compartmentalization along the way. And what I see, going back to people that go into the field and the people who sustain in the field, a lot of times it's by being blind to what's really going on that you can sustain your morale. And
Right.
it creates a naivete almost, and
Hmm.
and also just a blind trust that the government is the answer to, to get the funding, to get the grants, to create the programs, get the funding. What would
Yeah.
we do without that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely true. Like just trusting these political figures once again to do the right thing, even though they've proven time and time again not to do the right thing. Um, yeah.
And
One.
and also the field, social work is, if you go to like the NASW site, the National Association for Social Workers, or you'll see that it's very politically, the politics and the government is very interwoven, to the
Mhm.
point of telling you like how you should vote, or and what party to vote for. It's a very democratic leaning field.
Yeah,
And I find that to be very dangerous.
it
And I
is.
think part of the degradation of the field is this marriage almost between uh, helping people and being dependent on the government for funding, and then they get to tell you the rules. They get to call the shots, and that is dangerous.
Yeah. Even with what happened in COVID, you know, all that's a whole nother can of worms. But dictating, to workers whether or not if they could work in their field or not if they got the jab. And so that's a independent choice, and I do honor the free will of the individual, whether or not I agree with it or disagree with it. It
Yeah.
doesn't, you shouldn't violate the individual's free will.
And if the government is mandating certain things in order to get their funding, then agencies are going to bend over backwards to adapt to that, whether it's right or wrong a lot of the time, and then put that pressure downhill on people. And I left an agency because of that violation, and I'm not willing ever to go back to agency work, and work under those conditions ever again. I find them to be actually unethical and
Mhm.
the antithesis of what true mental health treatment and social work is. The field was started at a very grassroots level by individuals who cared, women predominantly,
Yeah, it is a
who
predominant.
cared about the poor, the homeless, the hungry. And it began as probably a lot through the church, as a um, what do you call it? A
Yeah.
charity, or, a charitable effort, right? And but also through mutual aid societies, which there was fewer restrictions for individuals to contribute to let's say a fund, or for people to join together to share resources that are there to help
Mhm.
whole community when someone is in need. And that shifted to then government control and micromanagement. And my thought is, we're in a time of such corruption and restriction and exploitation of both the social workers and clinicians and the clients, exploiting them, putting people between rocks and hard places around making a living, getting services, and so forth, that it's very subpar, and that we need a reform. We need to break out of the connection to government as much as possible, at least the way it is now,
Mhm.
because it's things are not getting better.
No, they're getting worse, and making it's actually teaching even the clients to think in terms of I identify with my disorders, even down to that level as well, like the whole DSM-5 and um the book of disorders. Yeah, the way that uh workers and clients are being taught is to think in terms of um a dangerous way of thinking of identity, I think,
I
because it
agree.
really keeps
Yeah.
you stuck in a certain frame of mind where I can't rise above my like I'm never gonna try and transcend past my neurological um brain disease, like as if it's like like that. And of course it's a spectrum. There's certain things that people will struggle with overcoming more than others, but we don't want to get stuck in that identity of that's who
Yeah.
I am.
That's a
So
big deal, really. I think it's a huge deal that there's too much emphasis on diagnoses, and then also the belief that once you have something that you're kind of stuck with it, and that you might need a medicine for the rest of your life, or people
exactly.
identify with their disorder or their diagnosis in order, let's say, to get a service,
Oh,
to get the help, to get social security,
yeah.
to be able to survive in the world. It becomes advantageous to have
Yeah.
disorders or
Yeah.
diagnoses sometimes, and so there,
Oh,
it takes away that thriving, that real goal of becoming a really healthy human being. Because if
it
you're too
does.
healthy, sorry, you don't get much support anymore. You're on your
Exactly. No
own.
incentive. Like that's
Yeah,
so, and it really does tie into so many other facets of the system of government, because we, see a lot of families that are broken that want to stay broken because it's advantageous to the single mother out there that knows that if they keep on having babies, they're going to, it doesn't matter if they're, it doesn't matter, they can have anything that they want. The government will give them everything, um, you know, food, shelter, and tech smartphones, and the latest technology. But the one rule that they have to stick to is don't have a man in the home. And and then they just keep on getting that check. And then what does that do? That breeds individuals, you know, that with, serious issues, growing up without a mother, without a father in that case. And, developing the drug addictions and the mental health disorders. And so it's just a vicious cycle.
yeah, I've seen that too, and I think it puts men in a real identity crisis, where they're not feeling fully valued, and equal in the partnership in a way too, because there's a disadvantage to having them around, or there's a lot of sneaking and hiding, right? It encourages lying, the
Mhm.
system and the
It does, yeah.
restrictions. So
That's
people are
important.
hiding, they're lying, it's
They
just not
reward lying.
healthy. It's not
Hmm.
healthy. And
No.
then kids are observing all this, right?
Yeah.
So that
And
becomes their
yeah.
values. That's what they see as normal.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's their education from the beginning. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think it really it negates the individual, and
hmm
doesn't allow for full individual treatment in a way, even though it says, that there's sort of words, they might use that language, individualized care, but we do the best as individuals to individualize our care, but the system itself doesn't promote individuality so much. And the whole diagnosis system isn't about individuals, it's about statistical correlations of symptoms and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's about matching everything in its proper place and tailoring everything in the proper way to fit the mold that can generate revenue for those that are benefiting at the top, you know.
Yeah. And the government system will put a lot of barriers to being creative in doing other options. So,
Right.
for example,
That's
uh,
true.
if people wanted to pool money together and pay for their own health care, that would
Mhm.
be not allowed,
Mhm.
in our system, right? Because there's a monopoly and on the corporate insurance companies, right, that are for profit and don't, there's just so many restrictions and limitations here so that for people to separate from the system, it would be, there's so many barriers in the way
Oh yeah.
to doing real innovative programs.
Yeah. They don't want real change. They don't encourage real change because all they encourage is the status quo.
Yeah. So, and when people are in the sink or swim overwork mode, you're not in your creative mindset. You're in your survival mindset. So that's the mindset of a lot of frontline workers
Yeah. Yeah.
is the brainstem themselves,
That's
Um,
right. They're in their fight, flight, or freeze mindset. Yeah.
yeah. So we're talking quite a bit about the problems that we've seen. Is there anything that we've missed that you want to highlight of what you see as some of the difficulties in the system or trends? You were talking about the zero trust model. Share a little bit about that.
The little I know about it is that, eventually in all workplaces, but since we're talking about social work and it's just, there's a lot of micromanagement that going on in our field. It's basically a technology implementing in the computer system that notices whether or not and detects whether or not the worker is actively working at their desk. So if you're, like your mouse isn't moving for a while or your keyboard isn't moving for a while or it's not typing, then it sends a notification to the supervisor, which then they can um it'll send a red flag to the supervisor and then that'll automatically get you in trouble. And then as they're currently building the infrastructure for the smart cities, I've actually spoken to individuals working as directors in companies that are making smart buildings. And so these smart buildings basically can monitor your behavior. It's not just about, regulating the temperature in the building, but they can actually like tailor the workers' preferences to how much, lighting. That starts there, but then the list goes on where if you say like you're getting up because a lot of times where we're working and during the day we need to get up, we need to move around and do that self-care stuff. It's basic stuff like going to get a cup of coffee to stay awake sometimes, um for those that like coffee. But the zero trust model, it'll in the smart building will actually monitor where you're going in the building. It'll be able to track like how much time you spend away from your desk and when you get back, and it's actually just like watching you and every move that you make. So there's a record of all that, and your supervisor will automatically know. And we know that that zero trust model doesn't really is antithetical to the honor system, which is what actually works. If you give people freedom or to make the right choice, I personally believe that the honor system works better. The powers that are ruling this world don't believe that we should be trusted with freedom, and that we would just rip each other apart like animals if we were left to our own devices. So that's why
Or
they do
make
it.
them enough money, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's scary stuff. And I think that that social service agencies, that's going to be the future.
Mm.
And to some degree, it already is, where you're clocking in, clocking
Yeah.
out. You only get X amount for your lunch break.
Mhm.
You gotta, get permission to take a break. There's all sorts of that happening in this field. Even there's a lot of therapy funnels right now, therapist funnels that are where, let's say, as a private therapist, I want to get clients through insurance companies, but I don't want to deal directly with the insurance and do all the paperwork. I can just sort of work with a funnel. I can get clients. So they're very popular right now, but then I'm noticing they're getting more and more micromanaging. So they're
Uh,
kind of giving you the note template,
mhm.
and some of these note templates are really terrible. And they're like check boxes, and they're almost forcing you into lying, into being
Oh,
dishonest.
wow.
But then if you don't sign the note, then you don't get paid, but you're signing it, which means it's your license on the line, and you're
Oh,
taking full responsibility for what's in it. So taking
yeah.
full responsibility for a template that's sort of pushing you into a corner,
Yeah.
and how it's written, and or just sort of like telling you what you're supposed to write and how to
Mhm.
write it, which,
Mhm.
yeah, that's, I have to sign it. So I don't really feel comfortable signing documents that aren't really my documents,
Mm.
but that's the norm, and most people just go along with it. And you kind of have that mindset, well, you just got to do it, if you want to get paid, you got to do it. And people just do it instead of like, wait a minute, this isn't right.
Yeah.
Why are
Yeah.
we doing this?
Yeah. Oh
And
my.
I want more people to question these things and to speak up and get out of systems. My goal is to get out of all these systems altogether and just be independent. Very hard to do if I'm going to rely on cash.
Mhm.
That's why most people in the field don't do that, because um, it's hard to get paid and make a living without some kind of
The record.
consistency,
Yeah.
um, and there's compromises you make when you're working out of just cash too. You're
Yeah.
not going to be helping the poor,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? If you want to
True.
help the poor or the
Yeah.
people even the middle class, you can't charge $150 an hour and think you're going to get it every week. You know what I mean? So it puts us in a lot of weird dilemmas, I think, and ethical
Yeah.
considerations. And I think even so in these templates, what I notice more and more, every so often, there's a technological upgrade, right? People will put money into technology for their
Mhm.
electronic records more so than in actually enhancing the quality of service for people.
Exactly.
And when they upgrade, there's things like timing you in your session, like that zero trust. It's
Mhm.
like, they want you to use their video platform so they can measure when you start and when you don't. And some random organization decided that 53 minutes is a full hour's pay, but 52 minutes is only three-quarter pay.
Yeah.
And as if that actually makes a difference in the quality of the session. Like to measure our work based on numbers of minutes,
Yeah.
or on, or measuring a client's well-being based on a screening tool that comes down to numbers, is very opposite of what real helping is, right?
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. It's some third party organization that's benefiting from that model that the company you're working for benefits from, which does not benefit either the client or the worker.
And I
So
find it humiliating, like it's
yeah.
degrading to me as a professional,
Oh
more
yeah.
and more as I step in to, engaging with, to some degree, with these systems. It's very degrading and insulting
Yeah.
to my clinical knowledge, to my professionalism,
Exactly.
and things like that. In fact, social workers and therapists really aren't given clout, in
Mm-mm.
it's like MDs are the only ones that can sign off, let's say, on certain paperwork or,
Yeah,
say someone, it's kind of interesting. We're
it is
like lower
interesting.
level um,
Yeah, but
citizens.
even the doctors out there, the medical doctors will and nurse practitioners will recognize our worth, but on paper, it's this semblance of status that is not on the same level, as doctors and nurses. But they're getting a lot of the end problems that if we were, supported, or if we were, our quality of our life, our lifestyles were healthier, we could, they're getting a lot of the work that we are, kind of, we're all sharing the same work basically. We're sharing different parts of the work. So, but they know that we're equally an integral piece of that whole assembly line, and we're just getting pushed to the side, I think,
Yeah.
on we're not being recognized. That's
Yeah. I feel like for example, in California, after COVID, the rate of childhood mental illness went up, depression, anxiety,
100%.
suicidality, teenagers, right, went up. And so what does the brilliant governor say? Well, we need more social workers in the schools, right? We're just gonna have more under experienced people trying to help in a very compartmentalized way the effects of a problem that is being caused in part by these psychological, social um, situations that the government in many ways created, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's sort of like putting a band-aid on and saying it's a solution, but it's only addressing the effects and not the causes. I think it's a good time to just start talking about possible solutions because, and I'll just say this, and this may sound extreme and trigger people, but I don't think we'll ever ease the suffering in the world if we continue to work within the system that is
Mm.
stealing from us and creating the conditions of suffering. Um,
Right.
and that is what's happening. The government is on one hand, kind of yoking us and creating conditions that impede our freedom and our uh, growth as humans, and yet that they are the source of the money, and they're sort of setting themselves up to be some kind of a savior, but
Hmm.
they're failing. Okay, they're clearly failing. And as social workers, mental health professionals, most of us have been a part of the problem, that in our compliance, we are
Hmm.
perpetuating the problem by continuing to believe in it and to continue to vote and think that a certain party is going to solve the problem, when if you look at history, you're seeing over and over that is not the case.
Right.
And that the
Yeah.
problems are so much deeper. We need to find different solutions, and it's through being free agents and individuals and using our knowledge and our intelligence to come together in new ways.
That's right.
So I think
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little about that, and also just really highlight the legitimate concerns, and that they are big, and that especially, if you go into the inner cities, you're going to see, like in San Francisco, LA, this incredible amount of homelessness,
Oh yeah.
incredible amount of substance abuse and addiction, and severe mental illness,
Oh
and
yeah. Yeah.
poverty and decay going
Absolutely.
on around us.
Yeah.
um, so there's legitimate concerns, how do we care for the most vulnerable and the dependent, the people that can't really defend themselves, the very young, the very old, the disabled. um, I do think that we have a system that's setting up people to feel dependent and
Hmm.
not be self-reliant in ways that they can.
Yeah.
System actually makes it very hard for people to get jobs, to make money, to be creative and independent,
Yeah.
you lose your service, you can't
It'd
it's hard
be,
to get out of it.
I think, not in a lot of cases they've taken away the vocational aspect of learning a new trade, maybe teaching um people how to do different skills more. That could be emphasized, I think, as a solution to kind of reintegrate people that are down into society again. Um, and like you said, we have to be free, independent agents in order to break away from this system of domination and control. It's just um, the first step is to actually see where all the holes are, identifying the problem, and then you can become more autonomous, like learning more skills. By just by learning more skills, it makes you aware of what your own capabilities are, and you can actually capitalize on that individually. And you know, uh, I think earlier we were talking about the value of social workers juxtaposed with doctors and nurses, and there's definitely that discrepancy. But I think if we start to take the power in our own hands, then that'll change as well. That'll shift, and it'll encourage other people in the medical field even to switch to break away from that system as well, because it's all interconnected. Um, but yeah, you were go ahead with your next segue. I think you were saying.
Yeah. I think that there are directions that people in the field can go by working together and going back in some ways to grassroots. And
Oh
it
yeah.
doesn't mean that we need to fully abandon, in the process of breaking free from the the control system, so to speak. We may need to wean ourselves off gradually from certain grants and
Yeah.
opportunities. And there are some that that are okay. But I think that we have more power. The people who are accepting government grants and so forth, I think sometimes need to say
Yeah.
no to certain things if you're compromising too much. If
Yeah.
you have to sell your soul and what's really right and good in order to accept a funding, don't do it.
Yeah.
So in the end, like understanding really what a right is,
Hmm.
and that when a system is telling us that we can't do something that's not wrong,
Hmm.
that's that's a wrongdoing. You
That's
know,
yeah.
we need to stand up for our rights to act freely as independent helping professionals and step into our own confidence around that, and be willing to take some more chances around that as well, which is really hard, and I understand I'm a single mom. I've had to
Hmm.
make some compromises in
Hmm.
order to make sure I had a home and food for my children. And that
Definitely.
is the where we're being coerced.
Yeah.
First
Yeah.
thing, the awareness, for more people to start to build the awareness of really seeing the coercion in the system and
Yeah.
the injustice in the system itself and the toll on yourself, and stop being willing to make a martyr of yourself or to sacrifice yourself as much in the way that I feel like many people are doing to keep a job.
Yeah. You have to be able to think outside of the role that you're being given as a social worker and the place that you're put into society, and recognize your individual value. And I think initially, going along with the awareness, but also this exchange that we're having right now is kind of the start of people coming together in the clinical fields, recognizing the problem, having their own awareness, and then forming groups is already a grassroots type of movement that can spread like you know no other. And
yeah, they
and
can
it's
start to stand alone, and separate from those kind of like controlling arms of the government and restrictions, and even looking at the licensing system itself, because
Mhm.
I do
Oh
actually
my
think that
gosh. The
uh,
boards are corrupt too.
yeah, and it's more of a restriction than it is a freedom for us to make a living.
Yeah, a
And
lot of times. These boards,
yeah,
they're not even about the tests. The standardized tests aren't even about like testing your knowledge on the subject. It's more about it's a money scheme. It's a scam, taking.
continuing education, some of the best trauma treatments you don't get taught in school. You have to pay privately to get, and some of them are thousands of dollars. The waiting lists are long. There's an inequity there too. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I think, the field has really gone away from being activists. So social workers were activists
Hmm.
and had this certain mentality of like fighting, standing up for what's right, standing
That's
up for
true.
freedom, standing up for the underdog. Well, there's an element of standing up for ourselves here as well, and saying no, and
Yeah.
really getting out of your blinders, like just I'm in my little box, but to
Mhm.
really open your mind to the larger systems issues that social
Yeah.
work is supposed to be doing, and to
Hmm.
see the corruption, to see the
That's
wrongdoings in the systems that are micromanaging our work, and to stand up against that. But mostly by dissociating from it, like not a mental dissociation,
yeah.
which is what's
Right.
happening, but an
Yeah.
actual detachment, and
Yeah.
maybe go back to the grassroots level of social work and build mutual aid societies and work with donors, who other than the government, who actually care about and respect the sacred aspect of the work.
Yeah. And also, yeah, I think going along with donors, being aware of who your donors are, like who's funding the money and what political agendas are they pushing. Don't just accept whatever donors are out there and that are giving you money, throwing money at you because oftentimes it's hidden with a secret motivation, and you got to understand like where you're getting your money from. Is it dirty money? Is it blood money? Is it, money that is coming with a lot of strings attached to it? So is oftentimes it's coming, if someone's handing you a chunk of money, it's coming with a form of control over your own sovereignty. So,
Yeah, so much, and I think coming down to very local,
hmm,
every locality is unique. Its needs are unique. The people's needs are unique, and
absolutely.
shifting more from sort of these global diagnoses and seeing lumping people into categories, but really coming down to individual care and working on smaller scale local levels, I think is where the power is. And it's not working with your, city council or some assemblyman or representative. I really think it's about people coming out together and
Hmm.
helping. Like where I live, there's been fires and things. I wanted to volunteer. I went to one of the Salvation Army or Red Cross. It was one or the other, Red Cross um, tents or locations. They wouldn't even let me help because I didn't go through all their
Yeah.
rigmarole, red tape, and it would have taken way too long, right, to even get
Oh
approved.
yeah.
While there are a lot of local people who just took matters into their own hands and created shelters and, emotional support and people offering to rescue animals. The main help comes from people, the
Hmm.
people themselves.
Exactly.
And it's how do we build back the confidence, the power, the awareness that we, the people, have the power.
Hmm. Yeah, we do.
So
Exactly. And it's so interesting when it comes to like the evil that runs in governments and those top-down organizations. It's like you're just destroying your own, you know, yourselves really,
yeah.
because like there's no real long-term benefit of being so greedy, you know. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think, the solutions are often creating bigger problems, like
yeah.
tenements in the inner cities as a
That's
housing solution, like inner city.
Mhm.
huge tenement apartments and ghettos, the creation
Uh-huh,
of
uh-huh.
ghettos and different things is
Oh, yeah.
it's like creates more separation, more
Absolutely.
overcrowding and the problems, the gang mentality
Mhm.
and so forth, that are that then, are like hiding, they create problems that then people blame the people for creating. And it's
Yeah,
like, and it's a
that's very
circle,
true.
it goes round and round. But
Yeah,
I think we're here, not to be in the camp of being over naive or
mhm,
um, but yet it's really important that we not be hopeless or
yeah,
too cynical, that
yeah,
that
yeah,
we are the people, okay? The
yep,
people that care, the
yep,
people that are generally in this field care, and we are the solution. And
yeah,
so from our care, we can start to come together and brainstorm and create alternatives, knowing that as free people, we are not subjects to just what the government offers. Or,
exactly.
and if that's if we get restriction and pushback and as helping people trying to come up with creative solutions, we're told no, well, that's a symptom of the corruption of that system, of the government
Oh,
itself.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
this highlights that. And that's
that
a problem.
yeah, it is, yeah, huge.
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, in another solution I think you and I were talking about was, creating, like, a chat group, type of on some platform for us all to kind of, clinical workers to engage and vent our problems, but also come up with innovative solutions in those private chat groups. So, kind of like little clubs of their own. And I think that's a start because we do need to share more information of like what's really going on and how we're gonna come up with solutions in those private, you know, discussions because not everybody's going to be involved or not it's got to start with us social workers, I think, because and especially the social workers are the ones that can really do a lot of real work, effective work for the people because that's our primary interest. So, and we know, I think we've been taught how the system actually works in a very formal way. And so that we have that to our advantage to be able to use that as awareness and then spread that to the rest of the population. But definitely capitalize on the resources that we have by using, different various platforms and apps or whatever to engage each other with, and share ideas.
Yeah, I agree. I really like that idea that, you had suggested that this conversation turn into more than just a conversation, but an invitation
Hmm.
to social workers and people in the field that care, that maybe want to put our heads together and come up with some more solution oriented action plans, so that things like PMAs or private membership associations is an example, mutual aid societies. There are some innovative ways that we could different people know more about this stuff than you or I. Let's put our heads together.
Yeah,
Let's
exactly.
join and talk and share in a very private forum. And
Yeah.
so my hope is that we can establish maybe a Telegram chat or some kind of
Hmm.
chat on a alternative platform, and put out that invitation for people to join the conversation. Maybe we continue these conversations, add some more folks to the mix, maybe bring in some healthcare people. Um,
Exactly.
because really we're talking about health, mental, physical, spiritual health. We can't
Yep.
really separate those things. We can't separate that from the environments that we live in,
Hmm.
from our social and economic base, from our survival in the
Yeah.
world as well. So this is a really holistic problem, and
Mhm.
clearly the solutions are complex and not simple. But let's start creating a vision.
Yeah.
Let's start putting moving in direction of improvement
Yeah.
and more freedom and real true care for all people, you know,
Yep.
of all levels of life. So hopefully
Yeah.
in our show notes or whatever, we'll have a link to reach out to us, and you can be part of the conversation.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for having me on the show, and it's definitely inspiring me to do more, and I hope it inspires others out there watching to do the same. So,
Thank you. Thank you. You were a big reason that, this conversation happened, coming to me and asking
likewise.
for this convo. So I'm really
Yeah.
happy with you, and so it's working together that solutions will happen. Yeah, thank you. So, all
Yeah.
right, Jungle, it's been great.
All right,
And
Leslie.
catch you
Yep.
later. Bye.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you guys.